All right, in this video, we're going to be going over another book by Jonathan Haidt. This is The Anxious Generation, The Great Rewiring of Childhood and How It's Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness. We've talked about a couple other books by Jonathan Haidt already. We talked about The Happiness Hypothesis as well as The Righteous Mind. This book of his plays off of some ideas that he actually presented earlier on in The Coddling of the American Mind, if you've heard of that or if you've read that, as well as this other book I have here. And he worked a lot with Jean Twenge on this current book, The Anxious Generation. This book is called iGen. It's largely about Gen Z and how data points within Gen Z differ drastically from the generations that came before them. So it's really an interesting book. But in a lot of ways, The Anxious Generation, I feel like, is a bit of an updated version of both of those books. It takes a lot of the same data sets and just expands them with new data that's come in over the past several years. So this book, I feel like, is going to be most pertinent for parents, educators, healthcare providers, as well as just anyone who's interested in how social media and technology is affecting the mental health outcomes of people today. So Jonathan Haidt, if you don't know, is a social psychologist as well as a professor at the Stern School of Business. He enjoys digging deep into questions like this, and as we've talked about already, he's written several books on these types of topics. So this book is focused on how there's been a fundamental shift in childhood itself with the rise of social media, the decline of real world play, and the emergence of what he calls safetyism, how it has reshaped how children are growing up, and how it has led to unprecedented levels of anxiety and depression. I don't think it comes as a shock to many of us that anxiety and depression levels are running rampant. They are rising so quickly that something has clearly changed. And as we look at a lot of these graphs, we see that big change came right around 2010 when smartphones, as well as their ability to access high-speed internet, both at home and away from home, and then the rollout of social media platforms, as well as particular aspects of those platforms like likes and retweets, things that enhance this need for social validation and all this comparison across groups. All of these things snowballed together and seem to be behind the rapid increase in anxiety and depression levels, particularly among the youngest age groups. So we see that, for example, since 2010, there's been a 145% increase in major depression, like diagnosable depression, among girls, and 161% among boys. College students experiencing unprecedented mental illness with both anxiety and depression, more than doubling since 2010, and other mental disorders increasing, such as ADHD, rising 72% since 2010 among college students. So he talks about what is going on, what maybe led to this change, all the different things that I've just mentioned that were rolled out in sequential order that have come together to exacerbate this problem. And he talks also in tandem with this about the rise of this idea of safetyism, or this belief that children must be protected at all times from all risks, including emotional distress and social conflict, particularly social conflict within their own age groups, and how this risk has transformed childhood environments in ways that have ultimately led to hindering kids' development, their ability to learn that they have their own self-efficacy, or their own ability to handle their own problems, their ability to branch out more and more as they age. So a lot of kids are retreating into themselves. They're spending all their time online. And he brings up this concept that children are anti-fragile. Anti-fragility is this idea of systems that don't actually break down under stressful conditions, but that actually are built to be stronger under stressful conditions. One metaphor for this, not metaphor, but an analogy for this would be how trees actually need the stress of the wind to push them back and forth to prompt their roots to grow, so that the roots will grow strong enough to actually support the weight of the tree itself, even under calm conditions. And he makes the argument that children are similar in this way, that they actually perform better across all these outcomes if they have some amount of stress as they're growing, as compared to if we try to completely control their environments and keep them completely safe from stress. So this, of course, applies mostly to youth stress, or a healthy amount of distinct periods of stressors that are pushing them towards, further development, rather than a chronic stress or some sort of maladaptive stress. We also see that there's been a decline in adult responsibilities among children, that they are engaging in adult activities to a lesser extent, as well as across the board, things like driving, things like working jobs. Kids are doing less of these things compared to before. And so again, it's leading to these 4 foundational harms that he brings up, such as social deprivation. Kids are having fewer in-person actual social interactions. They're experiencing sleep deprivation, which is particularly bad for teens in high school and young adults in college. They're getting less sleep on average than before, and at least in the recent history where we have recorded these sorts of things. So they're sleep deprived, they're deprived of social interaction, their attention is fragmented depending on how you divvy it up and what you include in your data set. You can reach the conclusion that many young teens and young adults are experiencing interruptions or push notifications from their phone on an average of 1 per minute of every minute of the day. So their attention is very fragmented. And just general addiction, that people are becoming addicted to these apps, which they are coded, they are developed in a way where they're aiming to get you addicted. So people are developing addictions to these apps in the same way that they develop addictions to things like gambling, food, and other things like that. He does spend some time talking about the unique harm that this has on girls and their tendency to internalize on average compared to boys, how the social media apps are pushing particular ideas of beauty standards, and it's harming girls' view of themselves. There is a graph that actually depicts the satisfaction that one has with themselves, and we see that about 2010 and thereon, it sharply declines both for girls and for boys. And he then ventures into the realm of spiritual elevation, which I actually have to commend him for this, because a lot of social scientists or scientific writers, they tend to be wary about venturing into this realm, although I think it is really important. I think part of the reason that they're hesitant to do so is it's difficult to explain these sorts of phenomena of human experience in scientific terms. So as one kind of wanders about trying to come up with apt metaphors and so on and so forth, because these are the sorts of things that are best understood through direct experience alone. But he makes an effort to describe how there's actually an argument to be made that such a technology-based existence with fragmented attention and lack of genuine human connection is pulling us further away from a sort of spiritual transcendence and satisfaction in this life. So I actually commend him for the bravery and just making the effort to venture into that and to include it in the book. So in the end, he makes a call for collective action, where he says that we should at least update the laws to raise the consent that you agree to the terms of service with one of these social media companies. Right now, that age is actually 13, which is really surprising. He explains in the book why that is, how that came to be at least. He argues that we need to raise that at least to 16, and that we must require these platforms to actually verify the ages of those who are making accounts on their platforms. He comes up with some different ideas of how they might do that. He also says that we need to ban phones in school, not just during class, because then you create a situation where kids are constantly trying to sneak their phone out during class and they're on it in between classes and things, but to outright get rid of phones entirely for the entirety of the school day. And on that note, he argues that there needs to be more play in school, especially elementary school, even middle school, and maybe even high school. There needs to be more recess. It needs to be more free form, free play. It needs to be a protected time, that kids need that time to actually learn social skills, get their energy out, of course, but also learn how to navigate their social environment, cooperate, use their imagination, and again, bolster their self-efficacy. He says that schools that have implemented this have seen decreases in truancy, decreases in kids being sent to the office. So there is some preliminary data that shows a lot of great effects for this. On one hand, we can talk about it and use, all these terms to describe it. Sure, but on the other hand, I feel like these things are kind of obvious. It does irk me. Take, for example, the rise in kids being diagnosed with ADHD, particularly young boys. That's coinciding with less and less free play for young boys and telling children to sit still and be quiet and focus on abstract problems for all hours of the day, and then pathologizing them when they're unable to do so. At one level analysis, I think this sort of thing is kind of ridiculous. So I definitely agree with him that kids need more time to play and learn outside of explicit school work. They're learning just as much, if not more, through navigating their social environment as young human beings. So further, the fourth collective call for action is that parents should give more independence to their young children, allowing them to develop a sense of autonomy, and that this should be more normalized, that governments should even rewrite their ambiguous laws about child abandonment so that it does not target parents who allow their children on purpose to have experiences with further and further autonomy, even at younger ages. And he gives some suggestions as to what he thinks may be appropriate at particular ages, but he does leave room for people to, make those decisions for themselves and adapt it to their particular area and their family needs and dynamics. So ultimately, I feel like this book is a text based on common sense, and he makes the analogy of a study where they pumped smoke into a room, and in the control, I believe that the participant was alone. So when they were alone, they very quickly went and told the experimenter that, hey, there's smoke in the room, what's going on? Versus in the experimental group, they were put in a room with other people who were in on the study and knew not to say anything, to just continue filling out their surveys. And when people were in that group, they were much less likely to stand up and say something until the smoke had completely obscured their view of even filling out the survey in front of them. This is a metaphor or an analogy for how that seems to be somewhat what's going on right now. We see the mental health outcomes are dismal for young people. We know in large part that social media and this addiction to technology at all hours of the day and night is certainly bad for them. But we're looking around, it seems like everyone's doing the same thing, so no one's trying to do anything about it. And I think that in this book, Jonathan Haidt has put his best foot forward to call out the problem, call out potential solutions, and I see that he's also going around doing different podcasts and things, trying to spread the word. So he's making a really good faith effort to try to do something about this. I think that's commendable. So if you haven't read the book and you have an interest in this area, then I would definitely recommend it, as well as his other books, as well as this other book I mentioned, iGen. It's all very interesting. I think it's important that we do look forward, as he suggests, and ask ourselves, are we going to do something about this? Are we going to let it continue to spiral out of control? At the end of the day, I think people are going to have different ideas as to what level these things need to be moderated and mediated, but something needs to be done beyond just giving our children, especially, these powerful tools that have all of these apps that have been developed specifically to take advantage of them, and specifically their young brains, and just allowing them to flounder and allowing them to suffer the side effects of that. I don't think we would do this in any other area of life. And so I think that as we move forward into this, modern era, this technological age, that it's important we come to terms with what this really is and do something about it. So that's The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. Hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one.